All right, Stefanos, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Unbreakable Success. I'm excited to have a conversation with somebody who I'm already beginning to think of as a friend. I have to apologize to you as you're listening, all of you out there listening and watching, because we kind of been chatting away and having some conversation. I'm thinking like we really need to be recording this because we're starting to get deep into the conversation. But I think we can pick it up with no problem. Anyway. For those that don't know you, Stefanos Sifandos, and we were working on your name before we started today. Obviously, you've got a lot of accolades behind you. You're an author. You've been doing speaking internationally. A phenomenal coach on masculinity and relationships. Can you tell us a little bit about you, what your work is like today, so people can get a good gauge on the things you're doing if they haven't met you already?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's a privilege to be here, Aaron, as well. I'm super excited. So for me, I blend a combination of neuro-empowerment praxis, Western psychological frameworks, and Eastern mysticism in terms of assisting people in cultivating their brilliance, actualizing their potential, or shifting from place of pain that they may find themselves in or that they're attached to. And so my coaching, or I'm not a massive fan of the word coach, but I don't think I have a better one at this moment, but the mentoring, the guiding, the coaching, whatever it may be, the friendship is it comes from a place of really wanting to serve and serve in the sense of how do we liberate ourselves from the tension or the incessant tension that we at times experience. And so the tools and techniques and how I do that are, again, a combination of what I've mentioned and also leveraging my own personal experiences and, of course, the amazing experiences of other people, such as yourself, such as people that I come into contact with, family, friends, mentors of my own and other leaders of past and present as well. And so I just really, I'm very excited about, I'm crazy about sacred union. I'm crazy about human optimization in terms of how do we really develop this amazing grand version of self.
Yeah. That's, and I love what you're saying there, especially about the term of, whenever I hear the word coach, and even though it's funny, it's one of those, we were talking about some quandaries earlier. And, from a business perspective, when you're describing yourself, you have to put something and condense it to describe what it is you do. Yeah. And I think for many of us in the work that you do and the work that I do, coach is usually the appropriate word, but I never really feel like it covers everything. It's a little bit difficult. So I appreciate you sharing so much. Give us an idea of, for you, when you think of a client, if there is that ideal person or someone who you meet and right away you're thinking, this is somebody I'd love to work with. What is that like for you? And obviously I'm not expecting you to have just one type of client you like, but what are some of the things that trigger you to recognize that somebody or a group of somebody's are the right people for you to work with? What's that like for you?
I love that question. Willingness is the first thing that comes to mind for me. And so, and to be really honest as well, willingness is something that I look for in my intimate relationships as well. Like, how willing are you to celebrate your joys? How willing are you to celebrate us as a couple? How willing are you to traverse your own pain and your difficulty? How willing are you to look at as much of life as possible and really absorb it, and then be discerning about what you allow in or what you continue to believe is to be true? Sure. But for me, that willingness, like whether it be with clients, whether it be my friendships, with any person that I'm interacting with, that willingness is so powerful for me. And it's a magnet for me. It's like what I'm really, really attracted to, and what I'm also looking for when I'm working with people. Because if we don't have that willingness, we're closed. We're coming more from fear than we are from courage. And fear is it's a constricted, restricted, tight, rigid place to come from. And so there's very little wiggle room. And we were speaking a little bit to your previous career, and like it got me thinking. Like, I've done a lot of work with special forces, military, and I've learned so much from working with these people, like so much. And some of the rigidity that they have found themselves in, like you would think, how do you even shift from that? Whether it be physically, emotionally, spiritually,
absolutely.
Yet they find a way. Willingness.
Yeah.
willingness. And it's like, in adverse conditions, whether it be, our physical environment, our internal landscape, in our own spirituality and sense of self, when we're faced with adverse conditions, it's our willingness that instigates our ability to be creative, to move and shift from that place. So if I'm with someone that has zero willingness, it makes it tough. It makes it really difficult. Yeah.
Sure. I think we can all relate to it. I mean, regardless of, for those listening, regardless of where you are, we've all experienced that in one way or another, whether it's a relationship like you alluded to earlier, or, if somebody's a manager, a CEO, or a team leader, or in coaching relationships, we've all been in those situations where we are looking to inspire or influence change in someone, but when there's pushback, it makes it a lot more difficult. So I love that, and hopefully, of course, if you're a listener of the show, I'm going to assume that you got some willingness to always be learning something new and get some new perspectives, because that's kind of our jam here. So
yeah, it's the openness.
I'm glad to have you here. Well, look, to catch people up, because we were, like I mentioned earlier, we were having a conversation earlier about masculinity, and I was really getting excited to have a discussion about the topic, because we've never really touched on it, at least from my recollection, in any of the episodes that I've had on so far on the podcast here. So if we can fast forward to masculinity specifically as a topic, I'd love to get your take on that, because that's become at least one of your areas, one of your targeted areas that you specialize in when you work with clients and groups of people. So give me an idea of number one, what kind of sparked that as being something that felt important to you to kind of focus on and dive into, and then help others with that process. And why do you feel like it's such an important conversation? I certainly have my perspective, but you're the man here. This is your show now. I got to hear from you, your take on that.
That's great, Aaron. Thank you. Yeah. So for me, what really sparked, there were two things in retrospect, one singular experience and then an ongoing experience that really sparked me delving deep into the psychology of masculinity and understanding what it means to be a healthy man in contemporary times.
Yeah.
And so the first was my ongoing relationship with my father and the masculine archetype, the father archetype. It was a very unhealthy relationship. There was, as I mentioned earlier, there was violence, emotional abuse. That was really the norm, the aggression, the confrontational approach to problems or to life. That was, the agitation, the frustration, the fear mongering. That was the norm for me. And so when I was in that was the norm. But when I was out of that, it allowed me to reflect and say, is this really what it means to be a man? Like to live with all this tension and fear and essentially bullshit. Like it was just so much heaviness, so much heaviness. And so that was one of the catalysts for me to look deeper into my own manhood, my own sense of self as well. And of course, just as a side note, I want to make mention that, the old cliche, hurt people.
Yeah.
And so this isn't a blaming or an external shaming to my father. For whatever it's worth, he has an amazing heart when he's connected to that, and his ability to give and be present is quite phenomenal. It's unfortunate that he didn't have the tools and the learning and the understanding to tap into that, and the support. He didn't feel supported in his own life. And so the second catalyst for me was a few years ago when I was in an intimate relationship with a woman. We were girlfriend and boyfriend. We were together. And I was unfaithful in that relationship, and I was committing infidelity at rampant rates. And so that all came undone. She found out, and that singular event or experience really, it caused me to look. It allowed me to look deeper into, is this the man I want to be in the world? Like, is this, because my whole world was falling apart. Like, it really was. And I couldn't see it. I just thought, this is part of life, because I was accustomed to that burn build that we had spoken about.
Yeah.
So we able to build and create as men, because men have amazing creative energy as well, just in a different way to women, as women have a nurturing creative energy as well, or the feminine does, rather. And I can go into masculine, feminine, what that actually means in terms of gender dynamics as well, like physical gender, beyond binary gender, also inclusive of binary gender as well. And so having that creation, but then this habit and familiarity of, well, I better burn it before it's taken away from me. At least self-control. We have control, greater control and autonomy, right? But it's a false sense of autonomy, and it's an unhealthy autonomy because we're not really allowing ourselves to appreciate what we're creating. And so we're creating out of insecurity, out of hyper selfishness, out of fear, and out of pain. And this is all suppressed and oppressed and within ourselves and unconscious. And so that opportunity, that breakup and that process gave me an opportunity to deep dive into me. And so I did that. I let go of my businesses. I went into debt because I literally stopped working. I just spent hours every day, 8 to 15 hours a day on personal growth, like on my own personal growth. I sought counselors, spiritual healers, guides, mentors. I put everything I had into that. I spent time in nature. I spent hours meditating, reading, being with self, crying, breaking down, releasing, like emotive cathartic releases. I immerse myself in physical activity as well to keep my body moving and at least be able to change my state to flux as often as possible, to have some level of reprieve. Surround myself where I could with good people. I let go of a lot of friends. I just stripped down and stripped away everything I was at an ego self, at a spiritual self. I was raw. I was just isolated most of the time. And it also served me as well. I needed that. Yeah. And that was my journey into that. And that was me. And so the first part of your question was, what was the catalyst for all that? And then the second part, I believe, if I remember correctly, is like how do we begin to define masculinity? Because it is such a complex conversation. It's one about culture, it's one about environment, but it's also one about our physicality, how our biology, our neurobiology, our physiology, men's physiology influences our behavior as well, coupled with what does the environment or the culture of that time say, and the culture of the past and how that's permeated into contemporary times and how we just sit there. And so, scholars will argue, like, is it our biology that dictates our masculinity? What is masculinity? Is it purely culture? I believe it's a combination of both. And I believe that every man needs to set out to define his own sense of masculinity. But I'm not going to leave people there and say, hey, go define your own masculinity. I teach this stuff. So
I'd be calling you back. You're not getting off that easy.
No, definitely not. So there's a couple of things, and I'm going to start with two major points. So I've developed a framework which has 12 principles. And these principles, they feed into each other, and there is a circular model. And one is not dependent on the other. However, they are reliant on each other to some degree to create a harmony and balance within the expressive self. And so there's two elements of masculinity that I'm really, really excited about, and they are inclusivity and sustainability. So let me elaborate on those. History has shown us as men generally speaking, so this is generalizing, to be quite isolating, to be lone rangers, to be also quite separating and segregating. And we can see that in our cultural practices. We can see that in our political systems. I mean, we can see that it wasn't until the 70s that women just started to get more rights, like some legitimate rights in terms of what they were able to do and be in society. So we've been quite controlling and oppressing as a gender. We haven't been inclusive in our decision making as individuals and as collectives. We've taken a superior ground. And then there's subgroups within men as well that have like caste systems of inferior and superior. That's not sustainable. No. Right? So it's not for our level of consciousness and awareness as a society and where we're going, and how technology is feeding into the rapidness of our decision making and how we grow as a society. This is just not going to cut it anymore. This sense of exclusivity and short-term gain, hyper-selfish short-term gain. And so we begin by looking at ourselves as men and saying, how do we operate in the world, the actions that we take, the thoughts that we have, the belief systems and the decisions that we make, and the emotions that we feel. Are they inclusive and are they sustainable? To me, if every man can start from that place, don't even worry about the 12 principles. And they're really deep as well. We'll go into them if you like, but don't even worry about them. Just start with sustainability and inclusivity. I believe that will change the entire cultural paradigm and landscape of the way we interact at a gender level. and it will begin to open up the conversation. And I'm not saying anything new here,
Yeah.
this has been going on for thousands of years. This has been hundreds of years. This will open up the conversation for, what's the word I want to use? I don't want to say cultural relativity. That's not quite the right term. I want to say it's going to open up a conversation for equity
Yeah.
in our society.
Yeah.
That to me, that's super powerful. And hey, I get it. I'm coming from a place of I'm a young male. I'm mid-30s. I'm male. I'm Caucasian. I'm middle class. I get. There's a complexity here with this, right?
Sure.
And however, we have to look at that. If we want to create equity in our society, we have to take ownership and responsibility, which happens to be the first principle of the conscious warrior, the framework. Yeah. Ownership and responsibility of who we've been as a collective, who we are, and where we're going.
Yeah.
And just get real. Just get real with who we are. That's the simplicity of it.
Yeah, I love it. You and I are on the same page. I have. It's funny because you tapped on the beginning points of talking about taking ownership and responsibility, and I have a framework elsewhere for something else, not touching on that masculinity, but that's a starting point. But I think, it's pretty universal, and it's certainly applicable in this topic of masculinity as we're discussing it today, that we have to take ownership of our decision making and take ownership of the process and take ownership of what beliefs we're going to perpetuate as men. Yeah. And if it doesn't start there, if it doesn't start with, okay, I'm choosing to, then you're a losing game, because then you're either blaming somebody before you or blaming society for, oh, this is just the way it is, and that's when all the power is depleted from the decision making, which makes it kind of interesting for somebody to claim some masculinity or authority if you're passing the buck in the first place. So I'm with you. I'm with you there. So we'll talk me through this then, because I completely agree with the idea of inclusivity, and you were certainly right. If we look at it from any type of historical standpoint, whether we're talking about in business and corporate, or just society in general, economic status, all those things, there's certainly been, especially from from the historical male perspective, it's just a long history of us versus them on so many different levels, and it's certainly something. Fortunately, I see in recent years. It's funny you touched on my career that's ending now. For those that don't know, I have a career in law enforcement. I'm 5 months away from retirement as a police captain. But it's interesting because I've been doing it since the mid-1990s. Actually, right in the middle of the 1990s. I got hired I started that career in 1995. So even in that relatively short window, we're talking 20 some odd years from then till now, the whole masculinity. If I remember some of the people, I was going to use the word dinosaurs. some of the people, some of the men that were there in that career when I started, and just the behavioral norms and what things were accepted, from everything from language, the way you carry yourself, in the demeanor, the way you spoke to people, what was accepted now versus what is acceptable now. It is night and day. And I think it's an excellent thing, because there's so much more self-awareness, there's so much more inclusivity, and there's a lot less, this is me and you are you, and I'm showing up here, and there's not even any conversation. It's just orders. That is not completely situationally dependent, but in large part on a day-to-day basis, that just doesn't happen anymore. And exactly what you said earlier, it wasn't sustainable. It certainly wasn't sustainable, especially in today's. And it's funny, you're spot on when you mention technology as being one of the reasons it's not sustainable, because I started in an era before most people had cell phones. As crazy as that sounds, I got hired. We were still using typewriters, and I was dialing from the payphone on the corner if I had to call somebody. But just in that short span of a couple decades, a lot of things have changed. Yeah. And a lot of things that we tolerated as as a society when it comes to masculinity, it doesn't fly anymore. And
Mm.
it's certainly not a perfect scenario. And obviously, the social media and the way that the speed and the scale in which news and information travels, it's not all perfect. But I certainly do think it helps in terms of what we will no longer tolerate. And it's not a
Mm.
perfect system, but I think it is a system that has allowed for some progress as far as that goes. So from the jump off point, as you were talking about, from inclusion and sustainability, where do you go next from there? Because I mentioned you had 12 steps. I don't know that we'll get to all of them today, but
Yeah,
but I'm
probably
loving it.
not.
I'm loving it.
Yeah,
I want to at least continue this conversation so
of
we can make it
course.
useful, and then obviously I'm definitely going to invite people to follow up with you
Yeah.
after we get off the call today. But where do you go from there?
Yeah, so we go into the first principle is ownership and responsibility. So personal ownership and responsibility, and that elicits a sense of power and
Mm-hmm.
empowerment. And so we make the unconscious conscious. We bring what is very far, for lack of a better term, or metaphorically speaking, very far away from us, and we bring it close to us. So when it becomes conscious, it becomes like Play-Doh, like it becomes malleable. And so then we can begin to construct our lives as we want.
Mm-hmm.
And we're really in a massive transitory period right now with respect to what it means to being a man. And so I want to give my not definition, but my interpretation of masculinity and femininity as well, because there's sometimes a misconception that when we're speaking to masculinity, we're speaking to men. The two terms are not interchangeable. So as human beings, being in a physical world, we live in a dual reality. And that means that we live in a realm of opposites, essentially. So, up, down, left, right, right, wrong, ground, sky. We live in a relational construct, a construct of reference points.
Yep.
You can't know something without the other. In other words, that's basically what it means. And so we're in constant relationship with something. That means there's a dualism there in life. And so masculinity and femininity reside both. They both reside within every human being, within every sentient being.
Yep.
And all it really means is just it's a state of expression. And so the dominant state of expression has been what we consider masculine traits, masculine expressive traits: independence, dominance, this control, this possessiveness. And so but that they're not healthy. Control and possessiveness is not healthy. Mastery and inclusivity is healthy. They're healthy masculine expressive traits. So we've come from when we look back at history, we've come from a lot of fear, and fear has driven our actions, our behaviors, our thoughts, our ideologies, and they've become the norm. And therefore, we've become very segregating. And so we've used our power in an autocratic way, in an oppressive way, as opposed to using our power to build. Right? We've used our power to build, but selfish interests. And that's really important. So part of the ownership and personal power is, one, acknowledging and this is a very complex, well, I don't even like to say this because I was going to say the word patriarchy, but how patriarchy as a system, and I understand what the definition of patriarchy means, but what's happened is it's permeated as a systemic influence in the way we geopolitically do our life, our economics, our businesses. And so these traits have become the norm. They've become hyper present. And so there's less balance of the feminine expressive traits. And so ownership and personal power allows us to take responsibility for who we are as individuals. It allows us to say, right, we don't need to tell lies anymore about ourselves. We can tell the truth. And the truth lays a foundation for facts. So the truth isn't exactly what sets us free. Our willingness and our tenacity and our resilience and our perseverance and our practice and our attention and our intention is what sets us free or liberates us from suffering. But the truth lays a foundation for all of those virtues to be expressed. Because if we're coming from lies, we're going to just perpetuate more lies. And so personal power and ownership is just a massive component, and it's the first lesson in the Conscious Warrior framework, and it really allows us to be healthier men. And so it's not just about ownership and personal power. It's about creating safety and stability in our own lives, like creating a more secure sense of self by looking at ourselves in whole. Because when we take ownership and responsibility and power for who we take steed for who we are, we're not moving through life in a fractured way. We're not moving through life in a broken way or a disconnected way or an in parts way, because we're looking at the whole of us and saying, you know what? I spent a lot of years being aggressive. I spent a lot of years being really selfish. I actually expressed narcissistic traits. I was a violent person. I was very passive. I didn't stand up for myself. And so when we start taking ownership of all that we've been, we become safe, right? So we become safe to other people because other people see a whole version of ourselves. They're not guessing about who are we. And so this becomes like we hold then a conscious vision for ourselves. And that to me is more authentic masculinity. It moves away from oppression and domination and dominion over anything that we consider less than. We begin to look at life in a more equitable way, and there's less division. And so that becomes very powerful for me in terms of a principle.
Yeah, you just said a word, and when you said the word authenticity, I think that's a big piece of this. At least in my experience when it comes to the idea and the expression of masculinity. Because, from most of the time, from what I've seen, when people try to express that old school version of masculinity, if you will, with the, expressing dominance, but you can tell it's just such a facade. It's like this mask, like Lewis Howes wrote the book The Mask of Masculinity a little bit ago, and I always think of that because I just thought it was a great title because it's you see it all the time. The person that's acting overly tough or wants to let everybody know how strong he is or dominant they are, but most of the time it's a facade. Once you break right through it, you see that there's pain behind it. There's fear behind it, and it's really not an expression of bravery. We talked about this earlier. I'll get to it. It's not an expression of bravery when they're trying to act overly powerful and dominant. It's actually an attempt to hide the fear and the hurt that's behind us. I mentioned we were saying earlier before we started recording today. I brought up the idea that a lot of times I think people make the mistake of trying to express or trying to compare masculinity with bravery as if they're the same exact thing. So people feel that if they're going to be masculine, if they want to attempt to be more masculine and have people look at them as like, oh, look at this strong person, this masculine, dominant, fearless person, then that means they just have to act brave all the time. But to your point, to the point of authenticity, that's just a massive mistake. Because the lack of the need, it's just, when you think about it, it's kind of insane. This idea that someone would need to constantly act or behave as if they are the strongest, most fearless being in the room in order to be considered masculine, and they are just always brave. It's nonsense. I can't tell you how many times I went to, I talked about earlier, I spent 15 years on the SWAT team. I can't tell you how many times I was scared as hell going to a job because, we had intel on the people that were there. So there was fear there. But that fear was turned into awareness and focus and remembrance. And, there's the breathing techniques, there's a visualization. But if there was no willingness to be authentic and say, okay, this is a scary scenario. And because this is a scary scenario that could be potentially dangerous, and I'm jumping into an example that I didn't realize I was jumping into. But the fact that there was fear there, and the fact that we as a team were honest about having that fear, it allowed for us to access our tools. It almost created a necessity for us to access other resources, whether it be breathing, skills, visualization, all these things. But if in that kind of scenario, if I only clung to, I just have to be brave, then it almost shuts out everything else. And it almost shuts the doors on the easy access to all those tools and those things. And I think in day-to-day life, putting that example aside, in day-to-day life, I think when we're willing to just be authentic as opposed to attempting to be something that we think we're supposed to be, case in point, masculinity. I think that
Mm.
authenticity allows us to open the doors and be willing to open the doors to, okay, there's all these other resources that I can access because I may need them. Because I am fearful. I am a little bit. I don't have much confidence in this scenario. And what can I use? I think it creates an avenue for better performance, which is, if I'm not mistaken, behind the work that you do is really about performance. And I
Yes.
think the word you used, authenticity, is a perfect word in this case. Yeah.
Yeah, massive about it's very much about performance. Like, I mean, we can perform poorly or we can perform in excellence. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a massive part of what we let that go. Like we have an opportunity to move in excellence, like in
Mm-hmm.
every area of our life, like whether it be excellence, like devotion and excellence. Like I really, for me, they're human traits, like they're
Yeah.
healthy human traits,
Yes.
devotion, excellence. Like, but when we're speaking to men and changing the paradigm and switching around the paradigm of unhealthy masculinity to healthy masculinity, we're talking about deep devotion in self
Mm-hmm.
and to a purpose and to cause or purposes,
Mm-hmm.
and having and carrying healthy pride in what we do and how we move through the world, excellence in treating ourselves and others and in every way that we show up. And this isn't to put immense pressure on us, because we
Yeah.
don't want to be attached to this excellence, but
Sure.
we want to strive and embody excellence. We choose that over, hey, this is too much for me, so I'm going to either revert to being oppressive and subjugating, or I'm going to disappear and be passive and meek. That
Yeah.
old paradigm is just,
Yeah.
it's not going to work anymore. Not
Yeah.
not for the level of connectedness and globalization that we're experiencing as a society now.
Yeah. Where are you seeing the most? Obviously, you've been doing this for a bit. Where are you seeing the most tangible changes? If we can put this in a setting for the day to day male that's just going through life, and up comes this conversation of masculinity, and they think to themselves, okay, is this or is this not applicable for me? I'm just the average Joe. I'm not some tough guy. I'm not any, someone who doesn't feel like they are at either extreme. How do you see this as a tangible asset on a regular basis? Because I think it'd be valuable for people to understand and really talk about how having this discussion and getting real about it and being authentic about it really does make a difference in the different contexts of their lifestyle.
Yeah. If I'm understanding the question, you're asking where am I seeing this most prominent in terms of this ability to potentially, like, what area of our society, where men are active, is a transition from unhealthy to healthy masculinity more likely to take place initially? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
actually, and I apologize. I should reframe that. Where are you seeing the benefits for people that engage
Ah,
with you and are willing to have
yes.
this conversation and be willing to open to new ideas about
Yeah.
masculinity in and of itself? When people are willing to open their mind and engage in this and shift from what may be an old perspective to a more inclusive perspective, the masculinity as you teach it, and obviously you're very in depth with the work that you do. In what areas of those people's lives who are willing to engage and challenge their ideas and their thoughts about masculinity, where are you seeing? In what way are you seeing those people benefit from that shift from the old to a more
Yes.
progressive
Yeah.
idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, in themselves, like in their own sense of self. So to put in something tangible, their
Yeah,
confidence is raising
yeah,
and it's rising. And what I mean by confidence, I don't mean egoic pride. I don't
hmm,
mean arrogance. I'm very, very specific about their sense of self, the way they view themselves. Their self-talk is more compassionate and
yeah,
less rigid and less judgmental.
yeah,
The way they've seen how they've behaved, there's more forgiveness, there's
yeah,
more empathy. So there, in other words, the marker of social and emotional intelligence is rising within the individual, within the
hmm,
man.
yeah,
Then from there, once he gets a deeper hold of that and he's more connected with it, he feels more open to be that person in his intimate relationships, the relationships where he feels most safe in. Generally not the men that he's been mixing with in the past, unless they happen to be a healthy conduit of masculine expression, which the chances are it's not. And so to give you an example, many of the ex-military guys that I've worked with and the special forces guys that I've worked with, there's a reason why we've worked together, and so they come to me and it's like they're like, I can't relate to the boys anymore. I can't relate to the guys anymore. Like, I want to change my life. I don't want to keep drinking. I don't want to keep suppressing. I want to keep taking drugs. I don't want to keep forgetting. I want to be different. I want to be healthier. I can't relate to these guys anymore, and I feel like I'm losing everyone around me. And so, because you'd know better than most, Aaron, that sense of camaraderie that you develop, that you cultivate and you bond under deep adversity, under life and death circumstances. I mean, that shit's irreplaceable. Like but then what happens when your values change, right? Like, what happens when your values change and the values of your peer groups haven't? And so the reason I went into a side note there is that men don't then really go to their peer group, because for the majority of the time they haven't shifted and they have as individuals. And so they go to maybe their wives, their sisters. They'll go to women more than anything else. Now, again, healthy women. Now, this doesn't mean, so for some men that are listening to this, because I get this all the time, but then we're becoming feminized and we're not becoming men and we're losing our sense of masculinity. No, shh. Stop. You're not losing your sense of masculinity. That's not going anywhere. It's only going to go somewhere if you're moving in extremes. So if you've moved in extremes in one end and then you're going to the other end, then yes, you will lose that, and you'll lose a lot more than that. However, if you retain that sense of sovereignty, so I've developed a model around what I call sovereign leadership, and there's 14 principles in that. And so you hold yourself in a discerning, confident way in your sense of sovereignty and who you are as a person. You won't lose yourself. We have this fallacy that if we're spending time with women, we're going to become hyper feminine.
Right.
No, what about the opportunity of complementing that femininity and using that femininity as a reference point, as an opposite to strengthen your healthy masculinity? And when you're in a sound frame of mind and an open, willing frame of mind, that's what generally happens.
Yeah, I love it. It's a great answer, and it's I love the fact that you talked about how the result of this, one of the first results of this, is an increase in confidence and that emotional and social intelligence. And that I don't think you can put a price tag on that, because that can be for many people, just from as coaches to use the air quotes, I think we understand more than most how powerful that can be, and how much of a secret that is for most people, meaning the lack of personal confidence and the lack of emotional mastery and emotional intelligence and social intelligence. I think people underestimate how many people struggle with
Massively.
that, and they overestimate how hard it would be for them to improve it in themselves.
And so that's sorry to continue. Sorry to interrupt you. I just had a thought, but go on.
No. That was it. I was just saying. I think people underestimate how many people deal with that as a day-to-day issue. That lack of confidence and emotional and social stability. I think so many more people than the listener and viewer realize are dealing with those same struggles. And I think it's important for anyone listening to understand that if they are one of those people who are in those honest moments when they're not masking and when they're not suppressing and they're not over drinking and they're not just deluding themselves by just numbing themselves, whether it's with TV or just the friends from high school, and just hiding the reality, when they're in that moment of clarity and they realize, this is a struggle for me, which is why I'm always trying to distract myself. It's not uncommon, and I think people should, more people. I'm hoping that people, as they're listening to you, feel some permission to take a step towards making a shift in there. Go ahead. I know you had a thought.
I hope so. Yeah. No, Aaron, I completely agree with you, and I'd love to give some context, because I don't want to just say, hey, social and emotional intelligence, and then let people ask, well, what does that actually mean? Let me give some. I mean, let me give some context to that. And emotional intelligence, again, is not a complex notion. It's just a very layered notion. But let me express what that means in context, like in actual, real, tangible
Yeah,
terms. And
thank you.
so, when men begin to develop this sense of a greater sense of emotional intelligence and social intelligence, there are a couple of characteristics that come with that. And so, when we don't have that emotional, we don't carry that emotional and social intelligence, that ability to interact in a group with people and so forth, we isolate ourselves. So our
Hmm.
sense of self-worth is low, our self-esteem is low, our self-value is low. And when we act from that place, it's detrimental to society, but also
Yeah.
to us. Like, it hurts us. And
Hmm.
we live in this constant pain and loneliness. And so the moment you begin to raise your sense of emotional intelligence, in this case, let me just give two examples, or two characteristics: compassion and empathy.
Yeah.
And so when you become more emotionally intelligent and socially intelligent, you're able to relate to people at deeper levels, and you're able to gauge the situation. So you have more environmental or situational awareness as
Yeah.
well. And so you act from that place, and you act from a greater sense of confidence because you have a greater sense of knowing, knowledge, wisdom, gnosis. And so that compassion and empathy, you can relate and you can feel people. And so you
Hmm.
communicate from that place, as opposed to communicating from a place of, I've got no idea what's going on, I'm just going to retract because I don't want to embarrass myself,
Yeah.
because men are meant to know everything. And
Yeah.
if I don't know everything and relate in the right way, then I'm going to be deemed as stupid. Then I'm going to be put in the out group, and then the brainstem's going to act up and fire
Hmm.
up, and I'm going to feel like I'm about to be annihilated. And all of a sudden, I'm 70,000 years ago, and I'm in the out group, and I'm cold, and I'm alone, and there's a wildebeest that's going to eat me.
Yeah.
Long story, right? So beyond that, what happens is we all want to belong. This is a
Yeah.
very primal thing. We all want to have a sense of belonging, a sense of union, and a sense of inclusion. And so when we raise our sense of emotional intelligence and social intelligence, we immediately feed into that primal biological need to belong.
Yeah.
And so men become less isolated. They come less from fear. They
Hmm.
don't leverage their physical prowess and strength in a negative way that is excluding,
Yes.
exclusion and isolating, but rather they leverage their strength in a healthy way that allows people, that build people up as well, allows people to be part of the tribe.
Yeah.
And that, my friend, is what I get excited about when I see men become more confident and
Yeah.
carry greater levels of emotional
Yeah.
intelligence. And that is just one component. That
Yeah.
link I've just made, is just one component of what happens. That's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, and I love that, and that for you as you're listening, that is like the diving board into improved leadership ability, improved relationship ability, improved, I mean, whether it's intimate relationships at home, with your children, with your peers. It allows for the capacity to improve those connections, either from in the workplace or in a personal environment. That sense of inclusion. It's funny. I my brain keeps going back to the old styles of leadership, the old carrot and stick. You know, like the old way of doing things, the old way of dealing with social problems. There's an old there used to be an old bumper sticker in the old locker room. God, I don't even know what decade it was from. I'm going to guess the 50s or 60s. But you probably heard the phrase before: the beatings will continue until morale improves. And that was sort of that archaic idea of leadership, where you just keep
I
pounding
love it.
away. You just pound at the problem until you cheer. And we'll pound you until you cheer up. Um, but
It reminds me of my father. Like, I'll give you something to cry about. Bang.
yes,
But I'm still
yes,
crying. Bang.
yes. And I think, and it's funny because I think most of us, and I love this conversation because in just in this particular era, this time that we're in, it seems to me that people that are in our age group in 30s and 40s, we are old enough where most of us had parents who have said those types of things, not because they were bad parents. It was just the way parenting was done. And again, I'm completely generalizing here, but we've at least heard of those comments. If the child is crying, you say, "I'll give you something to cry about." But I think in large part because of that social awareness and the information exchange that we have, and people like you, Steph, that are willing to be the leaders and at the forefront of these things, to say, okay, what are we actually doing and creating here by perpetuating these old archaic versions of leadership, for a better word, or dominance, and where does that lead? You know, when we, like you said, when we block someone out, or we make them feel like they're on the outs instead of including them because they're doing something we don't particularly agree with, what does that create? And is there something is there a different choice we can make that's going to lead us to more of the results that we're looking for? I love that conversation, and it's crazy. I'm looking at the clock here. We're 46 minutes in, and I could easily go for another couple hours because I got like 8 more different topics, and I think we have 11 more pieces of your wheel that we could get to. So I think we could probably do a good 12-hour marathon here if you wanted to.
Love it.
But I want to get to something really important, because this is something, for those that are still listening right now, this is a conversation that I think, man or woman, I think it's a conversation that really needs to be, we need to dive deeper into it. So can you please let people know how they can reach out to you and continue this conversation, work with you, and get more? And I can tell you already, I'm a fan. I love this conversation because it's so relevant to me and in the life I came up with, in the career I came up in, and I definitely, I'm happy to learn from you, and I'm appreciative. So how can we continue this conversation, my friend? Let us know.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words, Aaron. This has been an amazing conversation. I share the same sentiment, and we could keep going for hours and hours, and I love that. I'm glad I've made a friend on the East Coast of the US, man, after moving here a few short months ago. You can find me on any of my social media handles: Stefanos Sifandos, Stefanos, Sifandos. I don't think anyone else will come up. It's just me with that name. I'm pretty sure no one else has that name. So yeah, you'll find me on social media. If you want to join, if you're a man, you want to join my Conscious Warrior Facebook group, The Conscious Warrior, please feel free to do that. ReclaimYourKingdom.com is a 3-month online immersive for men, and that begins end of February 26th, I believe. So we've already started taking intakes for that. It's an amazing opportunity to get real support from other men, healthy men, connect, learn the principles of the Conscious Warrior, deep dive into self, and just make some massive changes behaviorally, neurologically, relationally, every area of your life. And so that's a very exciting, it's a program very close to my heart, journey very close to my heart. And you'll be able to find me at on my website as well, and it's the same as my social media handles.
Nice. Beautiful, man. I appreciate it. Listen, for everybody listening who didn't grab a pen and write down the spelling of Stefanos' full name, if you just go to aaronkeithhawkins.com, type in a search bar, you'll see it on the top right of the screen. Just type Stef, Stef. Nobody can mess that up. Type Stef into the search bar and hit enter, and you'll find this episode. And then I'll link up all your connections to social media, your websites, for those that are sort of writing implement impaired at the moment. Just go type Stef on aaronkeithhawkins.com. We'll make sure we get you connected. Stef, I'm going to call it right now. We are going to at least have a part 2 to this conversation, or at least a continued conversation, because I'd love to get into a chat about relationships as well. Husband, wife, those types of relationships, and how we can maybe share some nuggets of wisdom to give some support there.
Very excited. Those
are things that's the coaching I love to do, is with relationships and influence. So I'd love to jam with you on that.
Definitely.
I got to take a minute just to honor you. I got so much respect and appreciation for the work you're doing. It is needed. There needs to be another 100 of you out there sharing this to men in this world. And I mean it. I don't just say that from, I'm not just blowing steam because you're a guest. I say that because I've come up in a very masculine career. I've seen some of the changes that have taken place, good changes, but there's a lot more work to do. And I'm glad that there are people like you leading the charge. So thank you so much. And we're going to talk again soon. So everybody, if you're mad that Stef's leaving for now, don't worry. We'll have him back. I promise. He don't know yet, but he's coming back on the show. Until next time, everyone, we'll see you next time on Unbreakable Success. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again, Stef. I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you, brother.
All right. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Hey, it's Aaron, and thanks again for joining me. If you liked that episode, please make sure you hit subscribe to make sure you get the next one. Also, to get a free copy of my book, $1 Million Influence, plus access to free training and free one-on-one coaching to improve your influence, relationships, and personal confidence, just visit AaronKeithHawkins.com to get it all. That's AaronKeithHawkins.com.